Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second day of Cyseni 2023 conference. Yesterday we had a great day. I hope everyone will have even better one today. So my name is Justa Shirika. I'm one of the organizing committee. And today we will be having two keynote speakers. And the first one is Dr. Jaakko Leppänen, who is a research professor for reactor safety at Technical Research Center of Finland. And he will be reading a presentation on nuclear energy for district heating. So Jaakko, the floor is yours.
Meu share.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jaakko Leppänen, and I work as the research professor for reactor safety at VTT. My professional background is in nuclear reactor physics, development of computational methods for neutron and radiation transport, but recently I've also been the technical lead for this district heating reactor that we are developing at VTT. And my presentation is also related to use of nuclear energy for district heating. Okay, I did something now. Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, yeah, good. Okay, thanks. So here's the rough outline of my presentation. I'll first give you a little background on why we think that using nuclear reactors for district heating is a good idea. I'll also talk briefly about reactor technology and then about this project that we have at VTT and more details about the reactor that we are developing. So basically, this is something that you all know. The Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change has set these pretty ambitious goals for reducing global CO2 emissions to zero by the half of this century. And energy sector is the major source of carbon emissions, which means that achieving these goals really requires a comprehensive change in the way that energy is produced and used. And so far, the situation is not that great. There have been big political agreements over the years, over the decades, and considerable investments in renewable energy. But besides that, the emissions are still on the rise. One thing that at least I've noticed about the public discussion about energy is that energy is very often used almost synonymously with electricity. So when talking about decarbonizing energy system, people actually talking about decarbonizing electricity production. And even though fossil fuels are still widely used for electricity production in many countries, there are also countries where the energy mix for electricity is already relatively clean. And there are some positive signs like share of wind and solar power are increasing in many countries. And also nuclear power is regaining popularity in many European countries. And despite some examples in the opposite direction, I think there is reason to be optimistic when it comes to electricity production. But the thing is that the other segments of the energy sector, they sort of fall behind in climate action compared to electricity. So fossil fuels are still the main source of energy in transportation, industry, and heating. And for these segments of the energy sector, it is much more difficult to achieve deep decarbonization. The number of different options that we have for decarbonizing something like transportation in industry are much more limited compared to electricity production. And one thing is that very often, like if you think about transportation, transition to electric cars or some changes in industrial processes, the thing is that the energy consumption is sort of shifted to electricity consumption. So even though several countries are in a good position when it comes to electricity, there is also a need to develop more clean electricity production. So even that problem is not in that sense solved yet. But finding these low carbon solutions for transportation, industry, and heating is not that simple either, because large fraction of this energy is actually consumed in the form of heat. And there are also some industrial processes like steel or cement manufacturing, where the CO2 emissions arise from the process itself. So it's not just about changing the fossil fuels into something like wind power or solar or nuclear. It's about reinventing the industrial processes themselves. And hydrogen, which is considered a viable solution for the future, is something that will have a significant role. But I think that at the moment, the challenge is that the projected demand for clean hydrogen clearly exceeds the projected increase in production capacity. But what this presentation is about is about the heating sector. So heat is also a major source of carbon emission in countries with cold winter climate. And there are some alternatives to fossil fuels like bioenergy, geothermal heat, and heat pumps, but they all have their limitations. And in Europe, in particular in northern part and the eastern part of Europe, district heating is a popular heating form. There's 3,500 networks serving about 60 million people in this region. And one of the challenges is that much of this production is actually cogeneration of heat and power based on fossil fuels. So when the fossil fuels are decarbonized with wind and solar, it also decouples the heat production from the electricity production. So even though you solve the electricity producing part, there is still the heat that has to be produced using something. And the methods for heating are much more limited compared to electricity. Natural gas was previously considered a viable interim solution, but I don't think that in this situation with the war in Ukraine, this is the case in any country in Europe anymore. So what about using nuclear? So nuclear fission releases energy in the form of heat. So could this heat be applied to district heating? And there are some clear advantages when it comes to using nuclear energy for heating. It has a low carbon footprint. For electricity production, is comparable to wind power. The production is not dependent on weather conditions or market price of electricity, as is the case, for example, for heat pumps. Nuclear reactors are capable of baseload and load follow operation. It has a very good security of supply because the fuel for reactors can be stored on site for several years of operation. The challenge is that unlike electricity, heat cannot be transported over long distances cost effectively. So the reactors have to be built within the region of the district heating network. And the question is that, are we ready for these reactors operating in an urban environment? Okay, so going to reactor technology then. This is like the basic description of how a nuclear reactor works that you can find in your like high school textbook or very simple description in Wikipedia or something like that. So the operation of nuclear fission reactors is based on this self-sustaining fission chain reaction, which means that uranium atoms, they absorb neutrons and then they are split into two fragments, and energy and neutrons are released in the process. The energy heats up the fuel and the neutrons then continue the chain reaction forward. And with certain conditions, it's possible to achieve this self-sustaining state where the rate of neutron production matches the rate of neutron loss. And a nuclear power plant works simply by converting the heat produced in the reactor core into mechanical energy in the turbine and then further into electricity in the generator. So this is like basic description. The thing is that this description, it actually leaves out some important technical detail. And the reason why I'm bringing this detail up here is that in order to understand better why nuclear reactors are built as they are, it's important to have a kind of idea of what are the main challenges in reactor design. And some of these details listed here about the chain reaction are kind of contradictory to common sense. The first thing is that the chain reaction is actually a slow-moving process. The chain reaction is comprised of these fast bursts called prompt neutron chains that are then followed by long delays caused by so-called delayed neutron emission. So these prompt fission chains, they last about a few milliseconds, which is comparable to a camera flash, but the delays between these bursts are measured in hundreds of milliseconds, seconds, or even minutes. And in total, this makes the chain reaction a slow-moving process, meaning that the reactor operating state is actually, the changes are slow and they are easy to control. Second thing that is kind of counterintuitive maybe is that the chain reaction is actually an inherently stable process. So increase in temperature in the reactor core leads to decrease in power. So basically, the reactor has this built-in self-regulating mechanism, which is why the fission power in the reactor is maintained at the same level, even without any active control means. And these are because of the negative feedbacks in the reactor core. Basically, the reactor adjusts itself to a state where heat production and cooling are in balance, and there's no operator action or action from the automaton needed for maintaining the chain reaction of like running away. And the stability of this chain reaction is one of the fundamental safety requirements for reactor designs, and it practically applies to all reactor types. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that I can ask this next question. So if the chain reaction is a slow and stable and easily controlled process, what are the actual challenges in reactor safety? Is there anyone in the audience who has an answer to this question? See that you're still awake. Any guesses?
Waste.
Waste is one challenge, but it's not really related to the operation of the reactor.
High temperatures?
Not so much. Okay, so basically, well, high temperatures in the sense that the main concern in reactor safety is overheating of the fuel. So basically like losing the balance between heat production and cooling, because the materials in the reactor core cannot withstand very high temperatures. And if the temperature increases to a certain limit, the fuel is damaged and the radioactive fission products can escape from the fuel rods into the coolant system. And that's basically the first step in any accident sequence. But the thing is that the problem is not about controlling the fission process. The fission power can be brought down in a matter of seconds, and like I mentioned previously, it's a stable process, so it doesn't have this property of trying to escape to unlimited growth or anything like that. But the thing is that these short-lived isotopes that are accumulated in the reactor fuel, they release significant amount of heat by radioactive decay. And when the reactor is shut down, this so-called decay heat does not immediately drop to zero along with the fission power. So there's some power production in the reactor fuel that lingers there for a long time, even after the reactor has been shut down. And heating from this radioactive decay is enough to melt the fuel if the coolant circulation to the core is completely lost. So this basically means that there has to be some amount of cooling in the reactor in all operating conditions, including when the reactor is shut down. And because the decay heat, it cannot be switched off by any technical means, all design aspects of the reactor safety design are such that this decay heat has to be taken into account. Okay, so nuclear power plants, they are robust against external threats, but they are pretty vulnerable when it comes to loss of cooling systems. And in most currently operated power plants, these systems that cool the reactor are based on active systems that basically rely on electric pumps. And this means that in order to achieve high level of safety, this requires complicated, multiply redundant backups for the systems themselves, but also for the power supply that is used for running these pumps. And the safety requirements placed for modern power plants are extremely high. And there's an example from 2009 through 2011 Fukushima accident. What can happen if these fundamental safety principles are not applied? So in Fukushima, what happened in Fukushima was that there was an earthquake that basically cut off the power plant from the national grid. And this caused an automatic shutdown of all the reactors. So the reactor power was shut down, and the emergency diesel generators began to supply electricity for the cooling systems to remove the decay heat. But what happened then was that after 1 hour, there was this tsunami wave that flooded all the diesel generators and cut off the power from those systems that were designed for decay heat removal. And that eventually led to 3 core meltdown accidents in three different reactor units. Basically, why this was happening in Fukushima was that these were old plants, and the level of safety was still at the sort of level it was when they were originally built in the 1970s. That there wasn't this modern requirements applied there. But this is like a reminder of what can happen if these high safety standards are not obliged. Also, like what's happened after Fukushima during the past decade or so, there's been much more effort devoted to passive systems, which basically means cooling systems that can operate without electric power. And these systems, they have been built to large reactors, but especially for these small modular reactors, they're kind of mainstream. So I think almost every SMR concept relies on some kind of passive cooling system. So this brings us to the next topic, which is small modular reactors. So what is meant by this term SMR? SMR is basically, it's an umbrella term that covers these modern reactor designs that are smaller than the sort of previous generation large power plants. So we're talking about electricity production from tens of megawatts to a few hundred megawatts. Most of these reactors are based on conventional pressurized water or boiling water reactor technologies. And one thing to note is that these are not really like basement or garage scale technologies. They are still large power plants. They take up the area of like a small or medium-sized industrial site. Some common themes in SMRs are things like modularity, serial production, passive safety, reduced construction time, and so on. And in addition to electricity production, there are some new applications envisioned for SMRs, like off-grid applications, industrial heat, hydrogen production, and also district heating. And at VTT, we have been developing this district heating reactor for the purpose of heat production since 2020. So the project has been going on for a couple of years, but the sort of roots of the project extend to the previous decade and previous years. So some background here, district heating is the most common heating form in Finland. It covers almost 50% of the heat market. There's a phase out for coal in energy production by 2029. And the other sources of heat, other heating fuels like peat and natural gas are not considered viable solutions. And also biomass is considered only an interim solution. So this actually leaves very few options of how to produce all this heat for homes and public buildings in the 2030s. There were also some preliminary market studies done at VTT in 2019 that showed that nuclear energy can be an economically viable heating option in the next decade, but also that none of the developed SMR concept at that time provided sort of ideal solution for the Finnish case. And this is why we started developing our own reactor concept. So why is it so? The total heating capacity in the Finnish district heating system is something like 20 gigawatts, which is quite a lot. But the thing is that the consumption is divided into 166 municipal district heating networks. So this is completely different from electricity production, where you have this nationwide grid and even like connections between different countries. Heat is always produced more or less locally for the local city or local community. And these conventional SMR designs that were in development at that time, they could replace these large cogeneration units in Helsinki and the capital region, but most of these more than 100 district heating networks in Finland simply could not utilize the full capacity of these typical SMRs designed for electricity production. So basically, even these small modular reactors, if they were designed for electricity production, they were considered too large for most Finnish networks. There are these heat-only reactors that are developed in China, but those are for the local needs, meaning cities of millions of inhabitants, which is not really a solution for Finland or Europe, for that matter. Another thing is that electricity production at high thermal efficiency requires the operating temperature of the reactor to be increased to something like 300 degrees Celsius. But district heating networks, they operate at much lower temperatures, around 65 to 120 degrees Celsius in Finland. And this means that also the operating pressure of the reactor can be reduced from something like 15 megapascals for traditional pressurized water reactors to less than 1 megapascal for the district heating reactor. And these moderate operating conditions, they simplify the manufacturing of pressure components, like pressure vessels, for example, and they also simplify the design of passive safety systems, and I'll get to that after a few slides. Another advantage is that when the reactor is designed for production heat only, there's no need for turbine or generator, so this considerably simplifies the plant design. The technology that we're developing is called LDR, or low temperature district heating reactor. The conceptual design phase was carried out in 2020 to 2022. And from the beginning of this year, we got this new major funding for the next 2 years for expanding the design work. So at the moment, there are something like 30 to 40 technical experts at VTT working on this design, and we are also involving external partners through contract work. And after the basic design has been completed, the idea is to hand over this development to an external company who will then proceed to develop this into commercial technology. So that's not really the role of VTT. We are the initiator for this technical design. A few milestones. We are planning to construct this large-scale electrically heated test facility by something like 2027, the pilot plant by 2030, and commercialize the technology in the following decade. Already at the beginning of this project, we set a few of these design goals for the technology. So the idea is that the basic solutions, they would rely on well-known light water reactor technology from which there's more than 70 years of industrial experience. This is combined to passive safety features that really take advantage of this low operating temperature and low operating pressure, which simplify things quite a bit. We want to be able to use serial produced components using conventional manufacturing techniques, especially for the pressure components because of the low operating pressure. And one thing that's important for the Finnish case is that this technology is compatible with the Finnish nuclear waste disposal solution. So there are no moonshots, there are no quantum leaps, there's no reliance on any technology that hasn't been invented yet. And in that sense, this is kind of a boring, conventional, conservative technology that we are developing here. The single LDR50 reactor module, it produces 50 megawatts of heat. And this is essentially a pressurized water type SMR. So the idea is that the reactor operates at around 150 degrees Celsius temperature and 0.8 megapascal pressure. There's natural convection between the reactor core and the primary heat exchangers. So the water is heated in the reactor core, and this creates this upwards drift through the primary heat exchangers. And then heat is extracted into this secondary loop, water loop, and then through another set of heat exchangers to the district heating network. So the reactor is separated from the network by this intermediate water loop. And the heating plant may consist of one or multiple independent LDR50 units. And at the moment, we are considering both above and underground siting options. So in addition to building this like above ground heating plant, these reactors could be placed in underground tunnels excavated into the bedrock. And here are some illustrations of what these reactors plants could look like. So this is a above ground 4-unit LDR heating plant. So the reactors are placed inside this reactor building that sits here at the center. And then we have a secondary side building here, which hosts the heat exchangers to the district heating network. And then this auxiliary building with some technical systems and control room and so on. Here's another like a view from the from the secondary side. I've been told that this sort of looks like a school or something like that. It's about the same size, although schools usually don't have these like large concrete buildings, but in the other sense, maybe. So it's like a small or medium-sized industrial plant, basically. Few night shots as well. And this shows the reactor building with the top part lifted out. So the reactor units are placed in line inside this concrete building under these red cover plates here. And then there's the overhead crane and fuel handling machine that is used for serving all these reactor units. So the safety design of LDR50 is based on this robust passive cooling function, and this is an attempt to like explain how this decay heat can be extracted from the reactor without any electric pumps. So the reactor module is comprised of these two pressure vessels. That's the inner reactor vessel that hosts the reactor core and the entire primary circuit. And then there's this second outer containment vessel surrounding the reactor vessel. And the space between these two vessels is partially filled with water. The idea is that in the normal operating mode, heat is taken out through these primary heat exchangers here, which means that the water that flows into the bottom part of the reactor vessel is at low temperature. And in this operating mode, also the intermediate space here is at relatively low operating temperature, and the heat losses to the pool are pretty small. So basically in this normal operating state, the reactor sort of operates inside this thermos bottle, like it's thermally insulated from the reactor pool. But what happens then when the heat transfer through the primary heat exchangers is compromised in some way is that the hot water reaches the bottom part of the reactor vessel, and when it's conducted into the intermediate space, water here begins to boil, and the top part of the containment vessel is then filled with steam, and the condensation of steam against the cool outer wall here forms this very efficient passive heat transfer route into the pool. So basically this enables transferring the decay heat from the reactor core into the reactor pool without any pumps, valves, or any other mechanical moving parts. And the capacity of the pool is such that it can take up this decay heat for several weeks without any active cooling or operator action. So this is basically a very simple and very robust way of removing the decay heat that takes advantage of the low operating temperature of the district heating reactor. Okay, so the reactor core itself of the reactor is based on relatively conventional light water reactor technology. So the fuel that is used by the reactor is this pretty typical pressurized water reactor fuel. The fuel is as uranium oxide inside these metallic fuel rods that are collected into these larger fuel assemblies. And this fuel assembly is kind of standard 17 by 17 BW assembly, with the difference that it is truncated to 100 centimeter active length. So the fuel assemblies in large power reactors are usually something like 3 to 4 meters long. The energy density of uranium is very high, and to give you an idea, this single LDR50 fuel assembly can produce as much heat as 6 million liters of heating oil. And to give an idea of what 6 million liters of heating oil look like, here's an illustration. So we have the fuel assembly standing there. You can barely see it. And this is the 6 million liters of heating oil inside these 200 liter oil drums. So that's the energy content of single fuel assembly. The reactor core is comprised of 37 fuel assemblies at a time, and operating cycle is about 2 years. And after this 2-year cycle, 13 of the oldest assemblies from the core are replaced with new ones. And to fabricate these new fuel assemblies, it takes about 7.5 tons of natural uranium, which is this cube here sitting on this pallet. In reality, this pellet would not be able to withstand this 7.5 ton weight, but it's there to give you an idea of what the amount of natural uranium. Nuclear reactors are usually designed for operating life of something like 60 years. And for LDR, this would mean that all the fuel that the reactor consumes during this 60-year lifetime would fit into these two parking spaces here, pictured here. And it is the spent fuel that forms the high-level radioactive waste that nuclear power plants produce. So the amount of waste that goes into final disposal is the amount is the same as the fuel assemblies that go in. So the fuel assemblies, they're cooled in the reactor pool for some time before, and they're taking this centralized interim storage, and then finally to the final disposal. Finland is a pioneer in geological disposal of nuclear waste, in the sense that this is the disposal action is something that is going to be started in Finland within a few years now, and we are the first in the world to actually do this. There's a long history of this solution dating back to the 1980s, and so basically the solution is based on placing these fuel assemblies as is inside these copper canisters, which are then taken to these final disposal tunnels, something like 400 to 500 meters deep in the bedrock, and left there permanently. There was a political decision where this final disposal solution was accepted in 2000, and after that, the project has advanced to construction of these tunnels and an encapsulation plant, which have now been completed, and the final disposal of fuel from our oldest power plants is about to begin by the end of this decade. We haven't made any decisions or agreements about the waste management of these LDR reactors, but the idea is that because we are using the same technology as the conventional nuclear power plants, also the same final disposal solution could be applied there. There has been quite a lot of interest towards this district heating reactor technology in Finland. There are several municipal energy companies that see nuclear district heating as a promising option for the next decade, but there are also some challenges, like the current licensing procedures that we have for nuclear power plants. They were originally drafted in the 1970s for these large nuclear power plant units, and they don't really consider these like serial produced reactors that well. So it's not the optimal legislation that we have at the moment for licensing these these district heating reactors. They don't exactly prevent the licensing either, but it could be the specific features of these reactors could be taken better in consideration in the legislation, and this is actually something that is about to change. Another challenge is that these reactors have to be built close to consumption because heat cannot be transferred over long distances, and this puts even more emphasis on the safety. So we have to be able to really show and demonstrate that these reactors are safe. Small unit size and passive safety features are major advantages in this, and there actually are research reactors with about the same power as the LDR, 20 to 50 megawatts, operating in many university campuses around the world. So having reactors of this size in urban area is not that new idea in that sense. Nuclear energy has strong political and public support in Finland, but the talk about these urban reactors, it will be a completely another discussion, because even though people are in principle in favor of nuclear, when it comes to actually having this reactor almost in your backyard, that's when the real sort of discussion begins. So the first LDR units are planned to be built in Finland, but there's also potential market that covers at least European countries with existing district heating networks and public support for nuclear. And district heating is pretty common form of heating in the eastern part of Europe and the northern part of Europe. There are also new business models needed for this type of fleet operation. because these reactors, they will be used by these municipal energy companies. So basically relatively low, small scale operations. And it is not viable for each of these municipal energy companies to become the sort of responsible organization of operating these reactors. So instead, the idea is that there will be some company that operates this entire reactor fleet and then sells the heat to the local energy company as a service. And then this larger operating company also takes responsible of the safety and nuclear waste management of the reactors. It's also the maintenance, fuel and waste management operations also have to follow some kind of a centralized model. So far, we've mainly looked at district heating as an application for this reactor technology, but the same temperature range basically would be suitable for some other uses as well, like desalination, production of water for irrigation and drinking water in the dry regions of the world, some low temperature industrial heat applications, direct air capture of CO2, and so on. That was my last slide, so I thank you for your attention. Here's just a group photo to show what kind of people are working on the reactor development at the moment. This is a subset of the group, maybe like 20 people or so. This is from one of our project meetings a couple of weeks ago. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. You can also send me email. And just want to note that we also have a website for the reactor. This is currently in Finnish, but we are at the moment translating the pages to English. So probably maybe even next week we'll have a English version of the website open. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. It was really great. And I want to ask one question. You mentioned that economically, those small scale nuclear power reactors would be a viable option by 2030.
Right.
What are the main things that they are not viable right now economically?
That's a good question. In general, when looking at the nuclear industry, like all the previous experiences have been in the construction of these large power plants, which are expensive and long-running projects. And in order to get this like SMR production up to speed, there's a need to like develop these new business models and need to develop the supply chains for serial production, and that takes some time. So there are several SMR companies who are developing the sort of pilot plants and have plans to construct the first of a kind demonstration reactors. But in order to really benefit from this like serial produced components and things like that, it takes some time to get this like industry up to speed. I think that's one of the main reasons. And also, I mean, for the LDR itself, we also have a lot of technical development to be done, and also establishing these supply chains and all these like business models and all that is required for running these plants. So that's why, even though the technology is not that exotic, it will take some time to get it up to speed.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Could you tell me, are there any scientific relations or cooperation with the European spallation source?
Sorry, European.
Are there any relations and cooperation with European spallation source in Lund?
So do we have any collaboration with the European spallation source? No. I think what the European spallation source, what they are doing is like cross-section measurements and like nuclear physics. Our reactor is based on pretty conventional light water reactor technology, so there's no need to like okay, I sort of see where your question is coming from. Like it's for some of these exotic reactor types that are being developed, like lead-cooled reactors or sodium-cooled fast reactors. There is a need for measurements of like the physical properties of different materials, but this is not so much the case for the LDR because this is based on conventional light water reactor technology.
My question was, the reason of my question was because a couple of years ago I was for a minister meeting in Denmark.
Right.
And people from Swedish Research Council said that because they invest a lot of money
Right.
to build Max Floor and to build the European installation source, the idea was that they will support only science,
Right.
which somehow related to this European installation source. And if the universities wants to support other branches of science, they can only use their own money, but not from Swedish Research Council. So this is a very political project. This was the reason of my question.
Yeah, yeah. No, we don't have any collaboration with them. No.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. I wanted to ask what is the basic idea for this technology in during the year cycle in district heating, because
Right.
summer the heat consumption is less, so are these modules not operating or just one operating?
Yeah, this is actually something that is quite different from electricity production, is that the yearly cycle of consumption there's much more variation compared to electricity. So basically in the summertime, most of these reactors would probably be either shut down or run at lower power. So basically the length of the operating cycle actually considers this like lower utilization factor, because you need less heat in summertime. But like in general, this also depends on the district heating network, like what other production is there. Like you always, even in the summertime, you need heating to provide hot water for consumption. So the consumption doesn't exactly go to zero, but there's certainly some need to adjust the power level in the summer months.
Okay, one.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I wanted to ask about what's your vision for environmental impact assessment requirements for these small reactors? And it might be different for different district consumption and cost.
So the main difference compared to district heat production and like large power plants is that these reactors, they have to be built close to the consumption. So the traditional approach to building large power plants for electricity production has been that they are located in regions where there's quite not so much population, and that can be an advantage for the environmental assessment analysis. For the LDR, what we need to be able to show is that in case there's an accident in the reactor, the effects will be limited on the site boundaries, basically. So this requires sort of putting much more effort in the management of accidents, and also to really be able to show that these safety systems that we are developing for the reactor, that they really work. We cannot like take advantage of the fact that there's no one living near the facility.
Are you planning to conduct environmental impact assessment before or after?
Like environmental impact assessment is something that is part of the licensing process for every site. So that's something that has to be done for every site separately. It's not something that can be really done. I mean, we can do some like general level assessments, but it really has to be done site specifically. So, and we haven't like decided on the first site yet. So it hasn't been done yet. No.
Thank you.
Okay, one more short question. Short question about the economical part. You will now compete on the same fuel that use nuclear power plants. And as I checked, the prices in the last 5 years have doubled for the fuels. How do you think if you will reduce such plants, how it will affect all this smart electricity and the heat production?
Well, the impact of fuel cost on the on the price of heat that the reactor is producing is not that significant because the largest fraction of the costs comes from the construction and capital costs. So nuclear power plants are usually expensive to build, but cheap to operate, and the fuel price doesn't really have that much effect. We haven't done any like recent cost estimates for this reactor in particular, but that's something that we will be focusing on in the following years. Also, one thing to note is that when these reactors are used for heat production, we can actually utilize almost 100% of the output as a product that is sold to the customer. In electricity production, you're losing 2/3 with the thermal efficiency as waste heat. So we can also like tolerate a bit higher fuel costs.
Okay, thank you for question. Thank you for the answers. We would like to thank all of us. Thank Dr. Yakov for very informative presentation. So here are some presents from us.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. Now I would like to ask another keynote speaker to come, Dr. Anatoly Popov, who is a senior researcher at the Institute of Solid State Physics of the University of Latvia.
I also might be.
Okay, so the floor is yours, please.
No, it's Kaunas, yes, this one. I need to adjust one thing. Just stop. Okay. So it's
Good morning. I came from Riga. I am a scientist at Institute of Solid State Physics University of Latvia, and actually, because we are working a lot for European Consortium, my main actually idea to come to here not only as a big talk, but also to establish collaboration between our institutes all we was working for the diffusion and concerning other scientific application. I'm also responsible for the technical development with CERN, and next year I will organize two conferences, and so people are welcome to come to Riga to report the results. And today I will talk about our recent results, which were done in the frame of the European Consortium. Yesterday, Tony Daner, he said that we are his bosses because I'm a member of the European board at Jackson, but he is our boss, so he gave a nice talk about the diffusion and all these ideas concerning energy application. But our main purpose is to develop radiation resistant materials, because at such extreme conditions, we really need materials, and most of these materials were not tested at such extreme conditions. So we need to not only to investigate materials in, let's say, in a less radiation environment conditions, but also to predict the behaviors there. But also to predict the behaviors of materials. So this is just a list of our recent projects. So we are doing quite well. We won several projects from in let's say in one role, and we have several research tasks in conclusion. So we just a short list of what we are doing in Riga. Please believe me that I had no time even to explain what we are doing concerning all these things, because I'm experimentalist working in director department, and this somehow give me the opportunity to create link in all this sometimes communities which very often do not understand each other. But creating such links, we were able to win to people few good projects. So today I will talk to you about because we know that all these materials in high radiation environment strongly damaged. We need to predict their behavior in such conditions, because as I said before, for many materials we still have no real experimental results, and this is important. So today I will tell you. So we actually performed the detailed analysis of defect engineering in several functional dynamics important for your application. I will show you how this data depends on the type of irradiation, because we use not only neutral but also 6K ions. And maybe I will start with this first slide, which is I like. This is somehow a road map which was created in the end of last century, where you can see materials which are of interest of the United Consortium. And what's funny that all this chemical formula, what you can see here, is quite common materials. So why you need to why we need still to study these materials? Because most of these materials have never been studied at high radiation frequencies. For example, only for few of them, we know data obtained after radiation is more than 1 dBr. Because of the community this conference, I think I need to explain a little what some basic things. So we mostly speaking at this talk about F-center. So F-center is one of the main pollen defects in halide excitement levels, and this is just the vacancy with trapped electron. This is very, very common defect, and for many applications, this even is just important defect because of the application in in imaging, in laser application, etc. So let me just shortly remind you that when we are talking about radiation resistance, Some of the material are very resistant, but some of them are not because of the just chemical structure somehow. And this is important also for application. For some application, we need very resistant material, but for some, for other, we need opposite behavior because of the detection, for example, behavior. And this is why I like this very much because it's just an example how we can see radiation damage in our laboratory conditions of KCl crystal after quite strong irradiation with X-ray, and you can see the change of the color. And the change of the color is just due to by creation of coin defects, so-called F centers, and also by cold centers like so-called quasi molecules, halogen 3- centers. But when such defects are created in the crystal, the property of the crystal are changed. So we need to understand if we use these materials for practical application, we need to understand how these properties are changed. And this is just slide showing you that which properties of the material can be changed by irradiation. So both of them could be changed. This is just question of the type of the radiation. For radiation resistant material, this is let's say additional story. But for classical material like alkali halides, almost all properties immediately changed even after strong X-ray radiation. In our case, because of our place in the Fusion Consortium task, we are interested in permanent radiation damage, so when point defects are created, but we also interested in corresponding photo thermostat recovery of radiation damage. Still open question concerning transient optical absorption and luminescence, because we know from even from electron irradiation experiments that most of the point defects which are created by radiation combined in a very, very short time. So this is why we need not only to study materials after radiation, but we need a lot of new experiments which are going to perform in situ because of the much higher concentration. So radiation damage processes in most of the materials defects are created by particle radiation, by neutrons, by ions, protons, and but in the case of, for example, water or X-ray radiation, most of the materials there is only a distribution of the electron hole pair, so there is no creation of new vacancies and new interstitials. So in this case, the structure of properties are not changed, and only in few cases, so-called reliability is important because in this case, defects will be created by even by UV radiation, but it's not the case for materials important for fusion. So this slide just shows you that, for example, in order to create in spinel crystals, which are from the priority list of the International Consortium, we need electrons with energy higher than 500 kilo electron volt to create new vacancies, and these new vacancies could be detected by measurements of optical absorption shown here. This mechanism somehow unique in all, not unique, sorry, and works for almost all oxide materials. So in order, when we create crystals with these electrons. This stage is due by electron trapping by existing oxygen vacancy, but when we increase electron energy, there is strong decrease of F concentration, and this energy becomes so-called threshold displacement energy, which could be determined by simple equation. This value about 0.3, 0.5 mega-electron volt is quite common for all oxide materials, and this is just also somehow confirmation that defects are created in the oxygen sublattice. For many years we were responsible for characterization of point defects in oxide material. This is just two tables from our two review papers. What is important here is that for most of the oxide materials, simple electron centers are quite well characterized and their properties are known. But if we are talking about more complex centers, so F2 center is just oxygen, two oxygen vacancies with two electrons. This is two oxygen vacancies with one electrons, and let me show just some of our samples. People who works with Newtons knows that most of the materials are not available immediately after radiation, and this is why this business is not good for students, because students can't wait for a few years to get samples back, because samples are hot. Hot in sense means that they're just again. So samples obtained from different places, and what's important here, even you can see quite big diamond samples obtained from company from Germany. With this company, we are collaborating for many years to characterize diamond samples for evaluation. And even they were able to produce quite big diamond samples. You can see that the 55 mm is quite large size. But what is important here is that you can see some black spot at these windows, and this is technological problem, because we need to understand how this data are reproducible from one disk to another, and also how this black spot will be responsible for future radiation damage of such disk. So maybe one more important slide concerning just description of the problem. The main materials for evacuation, of course, are metals, but in the case of metal situation, it's much more simple. Even in the case of magnesium oxide, it's quite common and quite, for many people, is simple material. We have two sublattices. So we have several types of defects. So we have three types of oxygen vacancies, and we have three types of cation vacancies. This is a very, very common case in all oxides. So to understand situation when there are several types of film defects produced by radiation is really difficult task. For the moment, we still more or less understand situation in magnesium oxide and maybe somehow in magnesium fluoride. But for other materials, which actually from the theory, at least with the fusion consortium, we still have no idea about the behavior of cation defects. We know that they are not stable at room temperature, but how they influence on radiation damage, it's not clear yet. But as I said before, we need to develop even models to evaluate material radiation resistant, and in this case we need real data for, let's say, for defect diffusion, for corresponding coefficient for diffusion and stuff. So let me start with real results. So this is spectrum shows you data for magnesium oxide. This is optical density, and this is energy. So you can see here that there is creation of some optical active defects. This is Auction vacancies with trapped electrons, and this is more complex defects. What is important here? That stability of this defects depends on the type of the creation. So this is some people will say that maybe this is just experimental error. Later, I will demonstrate this is not true. This is, let's say, real physics. And if in the case of magnesium oxide, F-centers in thermochemically reduced samples are stable up to, let's say, 1000 centigrades. In all irrigated samples, they are stable only at let's say at 400 Celsius, and this is due to by their recombination with more mobile oxygen interstitials. So we create models to describe and evaluate all data from this thermal annealing. As just short description what this model can do. So we can evaluate diffusion parameters, we can evaluate even colloid formation, and we used this model already, let's say, in the end of last century for similar project with Volkswagen Foundation, just to evaluate stability of the optical windows for this company. In order to, we always need to test model for some well-known and well-established experimental results. So we use this model to evaluate thermal annealing of point defects in alkali halides. Just example of ATL. You can see what type of point defects, charge and neutral, charge and neutral defects. So this is you can see this vacancy with electron, and two types of interstitials. We know from literature that thermal annealing of these defects is at very low temperature. So we tested our model using class stages of the thermal annealing with different concentration by optical density or by EPR. So model works well. Then we performed this model then for materials important for fusion application. So first of all, we characterized materials for in which centers were created by thermochemical reduction. So we evaluate diffusion energy for such type of defects from this data using our model. And then we started to work with irradiated samples. So this is just first example, and good example as MgO crystal. You can see here three cases: neutron, ion, and electron irradiated MgO. There is huge difference in activation energy for defect annealing in this material. So 0.25 and 0.7 is quite high difference. So, but this is understandable because in the case of electron, we produce defects, let's say, randomly. There is no any defect cascade and no any defect interaction. But in the case of neutron and ions, situation is opposite. There is strong defect in interaction, and this is probably first reason for such behavior. But when we start this activity, we understand that all data which are existing in English obtained on different samples, because if we are talking about epicenter concentration 10 to 19 in cubic centimeters, in very often cases this is on the same level as the dopant concentration, which because there is no pure single crystal. There are always some dopants, even if you check all the companies which are producing. So many years ago, people started to use swift heavy ion radiation to emulate neutrons because of the quite similar defect behavior. And this is just a reference to the Gary Bass review paper, his edit of John Nuclear Materials, where he actually makes this final conclusion that people can use neutrons, sorry, heavy ions just to make neutrons, because it's more easy to get access for ion radiation than for neutrons, and also after ion radiation samples are less, let's say, less hot than after neutrons. So this is just an example where we can see that using ion radiation, we can actually cover all DPR range, which is actually quite difficult to do with neutrons, especially understanding that radioactivity of sample after radiation. And this again, some comparison of ion and test reactor data. So it's clear that ion radiation is quite good tool for material characterization. So we performed several measurements in different places, in Darmstadt, in Astana, in Helsinki. 2 years ago, I also mentioned here that we used Dubna in Russia, but now this politically is not good to mention, but we use many places for irradiation. And this is just an example, that experimental example. So you can see, for example, here fluence and optical density in MGO. So you can see how many points we obtained from single irradiation campaign. Please believe me that you will never find data like this obtained after neutron irradiation. This is such data simply are not exist. So after performing such irradiation, then we perform very detailed thermal annealing of defects, because the more point, more precise data could be obtained after thermal annealing. But when we compare ion and neutron irradiation, even in the MGO, we suddenly found that we have to be very careful. Always believe that ion radiation will replace neutrons, because from the cathodoluminescence results, we discovered that behavior for defect behavior observed in luminescence spectra is different. So this is quite important and quite interesting results, which still in mind. But let's go further. This is some kind of summary of the results obtained for GO. So we know the behavior, almost all defects in this is classical material obtained by EPR, optical absorption. So why, for example, EPR is report. All of you who at least perform some measurements by using optical spectrometer know that at high defect concentration there is saturation of the signal. So in this case, EPI is quite important because we can measure signal at much higher concentrations than by optical absorption. So we collect all data, what we found in literature, and we analyze this data, also our data, which we obtained in our crystals, in Darmstadt, in Kazakhstan, Dubna, and Helsinki. And we found firstly that activation or energy of defect annealing is different in all cases. But looking carefully in literature, we found that in many cases, especially in chemistry, biology, and in semiconductors, people observe that there is activation energy is not fixed for solid material, so-called Meyer-Neyden rule works well, and this is just activation of the model. We know from let's say from Raman spectroscopy data that there is degradation of Raman peak after neutron radiation. So there is clean soldering of the material after high DPR radiation. But when we observe this is quite good straight line for all literature data, not only ours, but also for literature data, ion, neutrons, and electrons. This gives us not only confirmation that we are working in disordering condition, but this gives us also the idea how we can connect neutron, ion, and electron radiation. This somehow conversion coefficient for defect stability when defects created by different type of radiation. So we continue this business for other material. Firstly, when I analyze alumina, you can see even is this literature data for from 4 different papers. There is huge difference between the shape of the annealing curve. We performed our experiment just to know radiation condition for defect annealing in alumina. This method was performed with sample which was related in Darmstadt at GSI by uranium ions, as I remember. And you and after we performed very vivid thermal annealing. So sample was heated, cooled down, measurements, and several stages. This is just behavior of the optical density as a function of the temperature. So then we analyzed all this data using our model. So we obtained quite low activation energy for defect annealing. But what to do? So we this is just table showing you similar data annealing from all available papers. So what we can see from here that there is a huge different between different experiments. But what is important, only in one paper, this data quite close to Abinitsa calculation. So it means that all this data below this value just belongs to the let's say strong radiation condition or disorder materials which were already disordered by neutron radiation. And we know this from other experiments, like for example from Raman or even from X-ray diffraction. We can see some results. So we again make a similar binary rule line. So neutrons, ions, protons, and our data, literature data. So there is quite good line which could can be used for comparison not only of different type of radiation, but also we can use this line already for evaluation of defect annealing in much higher fluencies than people used in all of this paper. And what is important here is that activation energy is going down when we increase fluence. The same story is also for magnesium fluoride. This is just the collection of all literature data about central stability. So this is just somehow house, but this is after detailed analysis of all the data, we again obtained quite a nice straight line for gamma, electrons, neutrons, and ions, and even for electron radiation. We observed dependence like this, so we can even relate now all this type of radiation, let's say, in one scenario. Why this is important? Because in all theoretical models which are describing radiation damage, people use from the beginning the same activation energy, for example, for all point defect like interstitial. But now we know that when lattice is changed, we have also to take into account the change of the activation energies of point defects. So model should be more complicated than people use before. Spinel is one of the most important material for diffusion. So we can, why is this important? Just to show you, because to study the physics of the radiation-induced process, we need criticals. But for practical applications, we need to understand the behavior of the ceramics, because we can't use the crystals in such big amounts, what, for example, you usually use, and also technologically this is quite difficult. So there are several companies which are using transparent ceramics with properties quite similar to the crystals, and we tested not only single crystal, but also we performed similar measurements and thermal annealing for ceramics which were irradiated by ions, by protons, and this is crystal neutrons. We again obtained quite similar behavior for thermal annealing. We carefully analyzed and compare all results with available from literature, and finally we again confirm that Meyer-Nagel rule works quite well also for such complex oxides, and this oxides is also in single crystalline and ceramic forms. So neutrons, protons, ion, and electrons at the same scale So we can relate all type of radiation and can evaluate what will be stability of defects after any of such type of radiation. Of course, there is open question, and I have no answer yet for this question. We used mostly we used for our measurements xenon krypton and uranium ions, but for the moment it's quite difficult to answer the dependence of such annealing as a function of swift heavy ion energy and type of the ions. So for the moment everything works well for each energy and for each type of ions, but maybe later we will improve this model, but this maybe not very important because for the moment everything works well and we could evaluate what we need. One example, we also perform measurements on such material like YAG, aluminum garments. So the same behavior for neutron and ion radiation, the same type of the annealing, and even temperature range quite similar what we observed for spinel and for aluminum. And again, my magnetic works quite well, and you can see here for comparison magnesium oxide, alumina, and YAG. The only difference, if some of you already seen this, that we have different behavior of Meyer rule as a function of those. In the case of binary oxide, activation energy is going down when we increase fluence, but for complex oxide like YAG or like spinel, activation energy is going to be higher when we increase fluence. And this is quite important because then we predict radiation stability and radiation behavior for complex oxide where activation energy is higher after let's say strong radiation. This is quite good point. Also, just a few slides about our ability with CERN, because for CERN they need also quite good simulator, and for some detectors, maybe you know that even detector built from few thousand quite big silicon crystals. There is detector which contains almost 100,000 crystals, tungsten state, and each of these crystals need to be predictable because when such detectors are built, so all this correction of radiation damage will be done properly. So our last test this few important material for CERN application was done using irradiation at again in Kazakhstan. It's AI. You can see here data for small radiation, and then what we discovered there are some important changes in optical absorption of this data crystal. What was the most interesting is that for Rousseau before this experiment, there was no any data concerning the speed of the absorption age at about 6 eV, which is still important for detector application. And now we are analyzing this part by thermal annealing. This is just detector unit produced from such single crystal. So you can see detector which was we obtained from the Caltech California Technological Institute for our test in India, because we need to understand not only radiation emission of such detector, but also this is quite big crystal. So uniformity of these crystals is very important, because even there are some difference in signal about 2%. This could be documented and used for further data correction. And maybe last data. This is data for diamond. We obtained such few disks from the German company which working for Eurofusion produce such diamond disk. You can see here the effect of radiation. So this is this was just after radiation. So many results here that we observed radiation damage in the region about 4 electron volts. Also, we found this strong degradation of the signal. What is important also, because these are quite big, we performed two-dimensional mapping using cathodoluminescence, Raman, and infrared. So we need to understand all properties of the disk. So you can see that all disks are different, but after this data, we sent some recommendations to the company which disks are good, which are not yet, just to find the best technology to produce larger such disk. And this is just example. This is non-radiated. Unfortunately, this disk was broken. So, but you can see that it is transparent because it was radiated by neutrons, and we have two disks radiated with neutrons. So this is just results of the infrared measurements. So interpretation of all these peaks was done and paid by preparation. And finally, let me just give you this conclusion. So from my talk, I was trying to explain you what we can learn from thermal annealing of radiation effects in functional materials from the priorities of Eurofusion concept. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anatoly, for your presentation. We are kind of behind schedule, so if there are urgent short questions, you may ask. If there is not, we would like to all thank you, Dr. Anatoly, and present you some presents for our organizing institution. So thank you very much.
If there are some questions, you can ask me just after this section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to inform that our keynote section is over. After the section we are having it right now due to being behind the schedule, the poster section out of this room. After that, we will have a lunch break, and we hope to see you all on the oral session number 2. So thank you for your attendance and have a nice day. Thank you.